There is one thing in life we all know for sure: death. Yet for Julian Assange, there's a second: persecution. Julian Assange is an Australian national and world-renowned watchdog journalist. The winner of almost 20 awards, Assange has been honored by publications and organizations such as The Economist, Time Magazine, and the People's Choice Awards. His work in exposing wrongdoing can be compared to few, but the United States has silenced Assange. While Assange lays dying in a London jail, U.S. prosecutors baselessly attempt to extradite him to charge him with crimes under a law intended for government employees. The persecution and prosecution of Assange should scare anyone. Journalists are needed in this world. Journalists expose wrongdoing. They call out corruption. But the United States has now begun to attempt to silence the truth. This is Jail, Julian Assange, and the future of watchdog journalism.
Hello everyone, my name is Joe Maronski. I'm a journalism and political science dual degree student with a minor in Italian studies and a sophomore here at High Point University. Currently, I serve as the Student Government Association Vice President of External Communications, among other things, and I'm originally from Long Island, New York. Thanks so much for joining my presentation of Jail, Julian Assange, and the future of watchdog journalism. So before we jump into things, we do have to define some terms so that things make a little bit more sense. So what is a significant activity report? This is a report which is often filed early after an event that logs what happened. That could be a bombing, a kidnapping, a shooting, or some other military activity. Next up is a detainee assessment brief. Now, this is a report filed by a commander that details the risk of a prisoner to the United States and its allies, and recommends if they should be released or held. Guantanamo Bay is a camp that was founded under President George W. Bush in 2002 during the War on Terror. This holds some of the most high-profile prisoners and threats to the United States and its allies. In court, it's usually referred to as Gitmo or GTMO. And lastly, watchdog journalism is a form of journalism that focuses on investigation and exposing corruption. This could be in the government, in companies, but it really focuses on interviews, paper trails, and much more to expose corruption and continue accountability. So who is Julian Assange? Well, you saw a little bit about him in that video at the beginning of the presentation, but let's talk some more about him. Since at least 2007, he served as the founder, editor-in-chief, and face of WikiLeaks. Assange is responsible for exposing war crimes, corruption, and much more, with his most notable piece being a piece called Collateral Murder. Now, this video was in the previous video, and it is a little hard to watch, but you can still find it out there. This video features a helicopter flying over civilians, and they claim that somebody's holding an RPG. It's later revealed that it was just a camera and a reporter for Reuters with some locals. They gun down these people and kill them, and then the helicopter flies away as the soldiers laugh about it. Assange is also responsible for the leaks of Hillary Clinton's emails in 2016, which is important to note. And lastly, he is from Australia. Born and raised, he's an Australian national. That'll come up a little bit later, but please do remember that he is an Australian national and not a United States citizen. So what led to the point that we're at now? Well, Julian Assange worked very closely with Chelsea Manning, then Brady Manning, who was an army intelligence analyst in Iraq. The two communicated via Jabber, which is a secure and encrypted communications form, and Assange was able to coerce and coax Manning to give him hundreds of thousands of documents. So let's break down the numbers of what Manning did give Assange. Manning provided Assange with approximately 90,000 Afghanistan war-related significant activity reports, approximately 400,000 Iraq war-related significant activity reports, approximately 800 Guantanamo Bay detainee assessment briefs, and approximately 250,000 U.S. Department of State cables. Now, pursuant to an executive order issued by President Obama, that's order number 13526, most of these documents were classified up to the secret level, but Manning did hold a top secret security clearance, which is higher than a secret security clearance, giving them access to all of these documents. As soon as these documents were released, the United States Justice Department under President Obama launched an investigation to try to find the source of the leak and prosecute the person responsible. They quickly ended this once they did realize that it was Manning and Assange. Manning was charged, tried, and convicted of 17 of the 22 counts that they had been charged with, but the Obama administration actually decided to take a step back from the charges against Assange, realizing the implications that this could have on the First Amendment and freedom of the press. In 2016, the Trump administration reopened this investigation, which started a whirlwind in the journalism community and much outrage. Former CIA Director Mike Pompeo said, quote, "We have to recognize that we can no longer allow Assange and his colleagues the latitude to use free speech values against us," end quote. During the initial investigation, Assange actually took refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he stayed for over 7 years. He was confined to a single building, could not leave, and this protected him from not only this investigation, but other investigations that were open against him in other countries such as Sweden. Eventually, Assange was forced out when a new president was elected in Ecuador, but while he was there, the CIA did spy on him, and other intelligence agencies did spy on him as well. Upon being forced out of the embassy, he was arrested and has remained in custody ever since, spending most of his time at Belmarsh in London, which is one of the most secure prisons in all of Britain. So let's talk about the indictment against Assange. There have been two. They're hundreds of pages long, but you're more than welcome to check them out. They are available online, and that is where most of this research does come from. Assange has been charged with 18 counts under the Espionage Act of 1917. He's been charged with 1 count of conspiracy to access a computer without authorization and exceeding authorized access to obtain classified national defense information, 1 count of conspiracy to obtain and disclose national defense information, 1 count of conspiracy to commit computer intrusions, 6 counts of obtaining national defense information, and 9 counts of disclosure of national defense information. But what is the Espionage Act of 1917? Well, this act was largely designed to prosecute government employees who leak government secrets. It was written originally during World War I and the Red Scare against communism, and its counterpart was the Sedition Act of 1918, which extended these penalties to private citizens, but was eventually repealed in 1920 by Congress when they realized the implications that this could have. So what's going on right now? Well, Assange is still locked in HMP Belmarsh in Britain, and things are not looking good for him, and his doctor has even said he will not live much longer under the current conditions he is in. The United States is currently trying to extradite Assange to the U.S. for trial, but a judge recently issued a 132-page ruling in which she said, quote, "Faced with the conditions of near total isolation without the protective factors which limited his risk at HMP Belmarsh, I am satisfied the procedures described by the U.S. will not prevent Mr. Assange from finding a way to commit suicide, and for this reason I have decided extradition would be oppressive by reason of mental harm." End quote. The United States is appealing this decision and trying to find any way they can to get Assange to the United States to face trial. Assange has numerous defense avenues in this case. Now, the first is pretty obvious. Manning was charged with 22 counts, convicted of 17 of the 22, and sentenced to 35 years in prison. This was commuted by President Obama, and Manning was released in 2017. So obviously, the first defense avenue would be that Manning has already been charged with this crime. But furthermore, Assange's lawyers could claim that because he's not a U.S. citizen nor a government employee, he can't be charged with these crimes under the Espionage Act of 1917. As I mentioned earlier, Assange is from Australia. The Espionage Act is for government employees. Assange is not a citizen or a government employee of the United States, and therefore does not qualify under this law. If that doesn't work, there is another avenue Assange's lawyers could take, which is case precedent. New York Times versus the United States, also known as the Pentagon Paper trial, was a huge deal for journalists. Now, in this case, the United States attempted to stop the New York Times from releasing all of this information disclosed in the Pentagon Papers. The court stated that they can't stop the New York Times because they're publishing something that they didn't get. They were given it. They didn't partake in the action of getting these documents, and they therefore do have a right to publish information that they deem important for the public to know. However, the court did not say that that is 100% true all the time. The court didn't limit this. They didn't say that everything for now on can be published. So there is a little bit of leeway there for the United States. Bartnicki v. Voper is a 2001 civil case in which a radio host aired an illegally recorded phone call, and the court quite simply said, if you didn't illegally record the phone call and were just given it, you can't be punished for it. Now, this is a civil case, which is a little different, but definitely a case to watch out for, as Assange's lawyers do have the option of using it. Now, if none of those work, there is one more defense route called mens rea, also known as intent or guilty mind. Assange has very clearly stated that his intent was not to harm the United States, but rather protect the citizens of the United States and the people in the world by exposing the wrongdoings being committed by the United States government. Assange did put people in harm's way with some of the information that he leaked, and soldiers were killed indirectly because of this information. However, it's important to note that that was not his intention. Intent versus impact, two different things, but all his lawyers need to prove is that he didn't intend to harm the United States, which precedent says must be proved. When charges were brought against two employees of the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee and eventually dropped, the court said that it's the prosecution's responsibility to prove intent to harm the United States. So that's definitely something we need to look out for from these prosecutors. The scary part about this entire case really is what could happen if Assange is convicted. We still don't know what's going on. A lot is happening. We don't know what could change. But if Assange is convicted, a lot will change. There will be less accountability. Journalists may now be afraid to publish information. They may be afraid to call out wrongdoing, and they may be afraid of prosecution, therefore decreasing the accountability of the government. A conviction would also devalue the First Amendment, and the court would essentially say that the First Amendment only applies in certain cases, that freedom of the press is not an absolute right, but rather something that can be taken back when deemed necessary. This also opens the door for prosecution of journalists who publish things that the government doesn't like. Most recently, during the summer of 2020, we saw a journalist arrested for covering the Black Lives Matter protests, and not only arrested, but charged and eventually found not guilty by a jury of her peers. This is a case that's a little scary. This journalist was there covering a protest, making sure that the public was informed, and was charged for it. And now foreign journalists have no protection if Assange is convicted. This opens the door for foreign journalists to be prosecuted for things that they do out of the country that the United States deems as a harm, but it also opens the door for the prosecution of American journalists on foreign soil. And maybe the foreign country doesn't like what this journalist is saying, and therefore they're deemed an enemy, prosecuted, and sent away. This case is very complicated. This is not an open and shut case. It's very confusing. Things are changing. But it's important that we understand the implications of a conviction in this case. Journalism is important, journalism is needed, journalism is key to the workings of a democracy. An Assange conviction would result in a lot of changes to society and journalism as we know it. Like I said, this is ongoing. I encourage you to stay up to date. I encourage you to read more about this case, look into it more. I'll continue to cover it. My contact information is on the screen, and I hope you'll reach out to me with any questions you might have.